My name is Paula. I work at ZipRecruiter, and I am here to talk today about the very sexy topic of data governance. And all of you got up at 10 a.m. for that, so woo. It's one of those subjects that, it sounds very dry. It almost curdles in your mouth as you're saying it, but it's kind of the most important thing that you can do for yourselves if you have a messy data stack. So I'll start off a little bit talking about ZipRecruiter, problems we're facing, and then what we have done that's tried to get our house in order. I can't tell you that I have all of the solutions, but I can at least give you a practical what's working so far. So ZipRecruiter. You've probably heard of us if you listen to at least one podcast. We do a lot of ads on that particular media forum. But our mission overall is to connect people to their next great opportunity. Counterpoint of that, we are a marketplace. We're also connecting employers to their next great employee. That's who pays us in the end. But this is something we take really seriously. I worked at Quora previously where we were a marketplace of knowledge. We were sharing questions and answers. Knowledge sharing is incredibly important, but if you're thinking about yourself as a person operating in this world, where you work, what you do for a living, it matters. It matters for your day-to-day happiness. It matters for your economic power in the world. It matters for the impact that you're having on the world, too. I think a lot of people in this room are incredibly passionate about the work that they do, and they want to make a difference somewhere. So basically, all of this, it really matters in a substantial way. And ZipRecruiter, our goal is to give everybody the kind of personal recruiter experience that a lot of us in this room are lucky enough to experience in the tech talent marketplace. So that's ZipRecruiter in a nutshell. Slide with some numbers about how big we are. 100+ million users, almost 3 million employers. A lot of people think that we do a decent enough job. But it's not always been the company that we are today. So right now, we are an AI-driven marketplace. We're a matching platform. We match job seekers and jobs. None of this is very complicated, probably, to folks in this room. So let me see, the machinery to make that work, we're dealing with hundreds of millions of rows of data per day. We might be pushing 1 billion. We've got about 37 models that are in production right now. They range from recommender systems to NLP models that are parsing text from your resume, trying to understand who you are, your qualifications, trying to understand what salary is this job likely going to pay out. These are all the things that we need to figure out in order to make this marketplace work. But if you've been listening to podcasts for slightly longer, you'll also know that this wasn't our previous business model. So where we started out was we gained traction by posting your jobs to many, many job boards. We were a spammer. We reduced employer toil. And even before that, the company was something else. It was a screening questions product. So if you ever look at our code base, it is called Starter View all over the place. Starter View, Starter View, Starter View. And that was the original company name, I believe, but it was starting an interview. And all that it was you could ask a question and recruiters could disqualify you, basically, if you didn't answer it the right way. So normal company story for a company that's a decade old. Completely rational from the business side of things. Leads to technical irrationality. So this is an actual screenshot of some data lineage. I think this is like a section of Redshift, and you can see it's cut off. There's more. This is no joke. This is what we are dealing with day to day. I feel like I see all the people taking pictures. I'm going to just own this. Like, these are the decisions that at some point we decided that we had to make as a business to move forward. But what we end up with is we are an AI and ML company. And tell me how you do ML with that. Right? Yeah, everybody's shaking their head, hell no. But the very, like, it's not just that it's not pretty, as you all know, it's basic usability things. It's data that's duplicated in multiple places. When I just joined about a year and a half ago, and I think we had 6 different tables in Redshift that were purportedly about applies, and just counting them and having basic attribution information. They all contradicted each other, of course. There are weird, basically you do queries, you get weird results back, you don't know why. It's even just hard to figure out what database you need to go to, how do you find it? And very, very quickly, this becomes the constraining resource in product development. You just cannot get access to the data that you need in order to make good decisions. So very, very true story here. When I started at ZipRecruiter, again, about a year and a half ago, I wanted to get to know the business, just like look at some basic facts, figure out what areas of the product were important. I wanted to ask the question of what percentage of our revenue comes from search traffic visitors. This is something that like everybody who wants to make decisions about what products to build or not should be able to figure out. I opened up Periscope, which has a lot of complicated problems, but one of our main workhorses, and I was just like, okay, let's start a query. I can find some tables that seem like they should answer this. It took me about 10 minutes to get my first answer. It was obviously wrong. I pulled in another PM who had been working in this area for longer, and we worked together for an hour to try and figure out the right set of filtering conditions and joins that I had to do. We had to ping other Slack channels. We finally got to an answer in the end, and honestly, I can't even remember it because it was so much pain to get to. But when you add all of that up, it was probably $1,000 for me to get that number in terms of the time cost, which is completely insane, and again, not how you can really run a business. So that's basic opportunity sizing, completely missing. And more importantly, when you're thinking about AI products, and Daniel's team is probably our top consumer of these, it just wasn't in a good state for that. So usually you are training a model to predict some user behavior. You have an objective function. As of about 3 years ago, we didn't have a single source of truth for clicks. And just we want to predict, are you going to click on this job? Are you going to be interested in it? It was not possible to track a large number of changes to our data over time. We still have this issue in a couple pockets, but we have like job taxonomies, skills taxonomies, all these structured data things that we can leverage to put data in places where we don't have a lot of content available. We didn't have any versioning on that. We couldn't track changes to it over time, and an analyst with relatively low permissions could potentially have shifted the behavior of the site for a lot of job seekers, and we would have very little way to know if that happened. Again, the questions that should take minutes, take hours or days. This goes for any model training you want to be doing too. And there's lower visibility into the state of the product overall. So again, what's the opportunity size, but also I deployed this change. Is it any good? Our A/B testing infrastructure was pretty off base too. And then like once it launches, how do we understand if it made a difference? So we were really in this pretty crippling state as a company. We just couldn't support our mission. So I see a couple of sniffles of recognition, the life-changing magic of this, the sparking joy. We decided to take some inspiration from Marie Kondo, who is a celebrity decluttering expert. And that is how we have themed a lot of our project names around this. But we asked the question, like, what about data infrastructure that is pleasant to work with? What about something where you can just ask a question, get an answer? So this is like all basic stuff that everybody here knows is going to be important. We want to be able to validate easily. We want to be able to reproduce models. Again, this is something that's very common for companies that started doing ML several years ago. just know we didn't have any way to track model provenance for a lot of things. Some of these are ML tools questions, but at the base of it, the very entry level of Maslow's hierarchy of data is data governance. So this is, I hope folks can read this, but I know that the text is a little small here, but data governance you can roughly think of as the set of processes, control structures that are going to allow your data to suit your business needs. A lot of times it's also covering security and compliance and things like this, but just basically, is this data doing what you need to do? And at the bottom layer of this is where you're firefighting. You are in a situation where things are poorly controlled. You're in a highly reactive state whenever problems come up, and they come up very often. As you move upward, you're expanding the scope of areas where you have control, so projects, organizations, entire company, and you're changing from a reactive state to like a manageable state and then a proactive state. So those are the basic axes that you have to work along. And now I'll tell you 6 rules. I know it's a cliffhanger. The rest of this talk is going to be very organizational and very just how do you make this work in a company, to say first off. This is the technical conference, but data governance by and large is not a technical problem or not a technically complex problem. It is a people problem, and we found that that's how we really needed to approach it. So the takeaways I'm going to give you: 1, making data an unambiguous priority, having clear alignment on that. 2, treat data products like the real products that they are. 3, set clear standards on what you expect the world to look like. 4, educate on all levels, and really I mean absolutely everyone from intern to CEO. 5, deliver value early. Another core PM thing, but looks a little bit different for some data products. And 6 is commit to trust. So let's dive on in. 1 is making data an unambiguous priority. I think that we were very fortunate at ZipRecruiter that we did recognize at the core of our business that this was a shift in how we were running things and that we had to get in shape. We were blessed with that to start. The journey here started maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I'd say, but with some realization that we were lacking visibility into these very core things. We started out with some basic projects to get core actions into a good state, but then what we really did was we encoded this in our organizational structure. You've maybe heard it said people are policy in a government setting in terms of who gets appointed to different things in whatever administration, but it's incredibly true, and you can tell a lot about a company by who is in what role and how many people are there. Headcount is not everything, but it says a lot about where you're putting one of your most expensive resources, which is your people. So about 1/4 of all product and engineering at ZipRecruiter is focused on data. And I don't even mean model training. I don't even mean use of data. I mean data care and keeping and basic stewardship. This seems like a lot. It is. We think it's worth it. And very frankly, there is plenty of work for us to do, too. So I mentioned that at the start of this data journey, a lot of the work was around how do we get this core action logging into a good state. This was like our very, very basic need that we knew that we needed visibility into. We started out there, we proved out the value, and since then have shifted towards a more balanced portfolio of projects. So we have some things that are in major data centralization efforts that are doing things like removing the 6 different applied tables and replacing them with 1, which is a project that has taken us, honestly, about a year. So there are projects like that that are very bread and butter data centralization and getting the data into the right shape. There are a bunch of smaller things that are accommodating work that is required for other project teams that are going to pay off in the immediate term. And then we've fortunately been in the position that we're starting to take a long-term view too, where we can say, what do we want our data strategy to be, and what bets are we making on what we need to get visibility into? So that's the kind of thing that you can expect when you actually are investing people and giving them stability in the projects or in the product area that they're specializing in. For us, one of the biggest projects that is coming out of this is, right now we're a jobs marketplace, but mostly we're looking at the numbers I mentioned before, clicks and applies. If you think about important outcomes for a jobs marketplace, you'll probably notice a pretty significant omission in that list. Has anyone spotted it? Exactly. People went into a black hole, and we were not actually able to tell, were they hired or not after they applied? So that ultimate yardstick of, are we doing a good job? Like, we could tell if customers came back to us, but we couldn't tell, like, did this work out or not? And now we've undertaken a massive effort to actually get that data and get visibility into, are we being a successful platform or not? So that's a big part of it. Put the people where you need them to be. The next is treating data products like real products. Again, joined ZipRecruiter fairly recently. Before this, I was at Quora, where we had this notion of product teams and a notion of technical teams. Technical teams were led by engineers. We didn't really worry about them. Product teams were run by product people. They dealt with consumers and all the fun stuff. Honestly, I was interviewing. I loved all the people I was meeting. I was like, this sounds like a really fun role. But in the back of my head, there's like why the hell do you have PMs here? Like, don't the engineers know what they're doing? And anyone who's a PM in this room knows, like, that's not what you're there for. Hopefully all engineers know that too. But it wasn't actually obvious to me at the beginning. And some of what's happened here is just that the complexity of the problem has necessitated this new specialization within product. And that's really how we're treating it. So again, it is a specific set of skills. It is a specific set of core competencies that we work on developing in our people in the product area. Data sets we treat as products with customers. Every new one that we're putting out has a requirements list that includes different APIs, that need to be satisfied, whether they're requirements for the data freshness, all of these different properties that we need to put together. By the same token, these products have customers, but as good PMs, we also strive to give you what you need and not exactly what you ask for. I think a lot of our data landscape right now has developed from people getting what they're asking for, honestly. So that is people making Periscope dashes that fulfill a certain purpose, but not thinking about the long-term effects of, like, do we have a stable ecosystem of dashboards? What's the difference between something that's a disposable analysis or not? Like, it was just kind of like, let it happen. And then that's kind of what resulted in our Redshift and Periscope landscape especially. So as I mentioned before, we define the strategy for data collection and use. We have a long-term vision. We set KPIs just like any other product team. And we develop specialized guides and templates that get off to a good start. We give ourselves good maintenance on, or a good place to jump off from in terms of what are the checklists, what are the important things that you need to do in order to run one of these projects well. So next up is setting clear standards. Again, something fairly obvious, but if you want your data to look like a certain thing, you have to define what that thing is. So as I mentioned, we aligned on what are the requirements that this data needs to meet, what are the use cases it needs to serve. Mostly we were talking about model development and general analytics use cases. So thinking about most data stores with those lenses and deciding is this going to be the same product that serves both, or is it only serving one or the other? And very often, like, my team is doing a lot of data centralization, but very often what makes sense for analytics is not going to make sense for machine learning. So it's not about everything needs to be in one place. It's just you need to be very clear about what mode you're operating in and what can be used for what. So we established shared vocabulary on this and best practices, support tiers of different data sets. And this is an example of the type of slide that we would have in that standards process. We had one of our very senior engineering leaders literally put together a 100 slide deck on all of the terms that you needed to know if you're building data sets, and all of the expectations for data sets of different types. So this is just an example of like the different trust levels that we have in different data sets. It looks like we had some formatting changes, but you know, we had some clarity of like, okay, what is a fact data? What's derived data? Should this be cleaned? What are the expectations you should have about how good this data is? We had a series of presentations, I think, over the course of a month or two. He probably spent about 10 hours presenting this entire set of material to all of the data engineers in the company. But lest you think that we are just going for very, very long and boring presentations about what exactly our standards are, we also do try to have fun. Most of our other slide decks have a lot of GIFs in them, too. So, I mean, there's a purpose to that. It really helps it be more memorable, especially to people who are not steeped in this area. But this is also an equally representative slide of the way that we work at ZipRecruiter. Next up is education. And I mentioned at the start of this that this goes all the way from intern to CEO, and those groups obviously have different needs. So I've talked a little bit about the needs of the first two. A lot of those are educating about what are we trying to build, how do we make sure that this works. We also do a lot of demos and office hours that are aimed at empowering all functions to really operate in a data-aware way. I personally host an office hours, like peer data workshop session every week, where I just tell people, bring your queries. Like, we'll figure it out together. And this is something where SQL is not a base requirement for most of our PM roles, although we usually try to hold it within the data product specialization. But it's a way for people to get comfortable with it, get used to asking questions, and get used to the idea that you may need to ask for help in a lot of cases too. The side quest on this is that it also helps people really viscerally understand how complicated our data is and help us invest a bit more. But those are kind of the what's going on at the lower levels. The other important part is that we do product walkthroughs for executives and really focus on how do we teach them. So I mentioned that they have good alignment, that this is important. That's fantastic. Alignment, though, is it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle change. It's something that you're doing every single day. And I, as an example of this, when I first started, had an intro meeting with the CPO, and he was trying to be nice. He was saying, like, I think what you're doing on this team is really important work. I'm really invested in it. Like, we might not talk about it as much as all hand slides as the consumer stuff, but like, I really care. I was like, great, okay, a lot to unpack there. And the conversation that we had from there was, okay, why not? Like, you say this work is important. I need you to actually show other people that this is important. So what tools can I give you? What do you need to be an effective data storyteller? And a lot of times it's kind of a gap. They're maybe not as familiar with machine learning. They know that it's important. They know that they want to invest in it, but they leave a lot of the details to other people. And we really try to make them understand. We point out the things that are easy and the things that are hard. We talk about why in God's green earth it takes a year to actually centralize to one apply table. And we're doing this pretty constantly. So I think that, you know, once we kind of pointed that out and really have the conversation about why are you not talking about this, it really shifted their behavior too. And like in one of our most recent updates about product talks, like experimentation platform was one of the things that the CPO said he was most excited about out of everything else in the deck. And that's coming a very, very long way from where we started. So next up is delivering value early. This is basic for, I think, any PM. You're always thinking about what is your MVP. But it's a little bit easy to get lost in the weeds, I think, for some of the data stuff, because a lot of it is a long lead time. We found that usually we're working most effectively when we're running 6 months ahead of the rest of the company's strategy. So we're building up the infrastructure and ready to deliver it when you need it. But the bad case of this, and the mode that was a painful lesson for me, we had this case where a team was like, oh, we really need to know this specific attribute about job seekers. Like, we think that we can customize so much off of this. We really want this on your roadmap. We said, great. We went away for a quarter. We developed a model. I came back. I was like, this is the best model ever. It's like 90+% precision and recall. Like, I cannot tell you how rare it is that we get a model like this. And their roadmap had moved on. They weren't sure how much this really mattered. They weren't sure how much impact they would get if they incorporated it into the flows that they had originally been thinking of. And honestly, we are still shopping around for a use case for it today. And if no one picks it up in the next month, we're going to kill it. And that's really sad to me. Like, it's a good model. It did nothing wrong. But we do have to be practical in terms of our maintenance costs. But the mode that we are working in now, we just kind of like took our lumps and our lessons. But the mode that we're working in is really validating early and often. And for a lot of data projects, like, centralization is a little bit hard to figure out. But if you're thinking about models that you expect to be incorporating in a lot of different places, there's often a very hacky way that you can make sure that you're getting value. So for this particular classifier, what we should have done was like take a small set of users, come up with a heuristic, set up the consumer endpoint, and make sure it worked, make sure that it did something. And that's the mode that we are operating in now. Every proposed project needs to have a use case committed and really signed on to it. And we need to make sure that we're going to be in a position to actually use what we're building. I don't even need to tell you all of the morale problems too for the engineers who built this poor model that is fantastic. But again, not what we need right now. And then the last one. Again, this is going to be the most obvious thing in the world, but committing to trust. And the statement here, the power of data is objective. Obviously, as a PM, I'm making choices about what is the data I look at, what's the data I have, in the same way that journalists are picking what stories do they cover or not. There is some editorializing in terms of what you show. But after that fact, what are the basic facts of what's happening on your platform? Data is objective. That's its whole point. It's supposed to level the playing field in terms of what's important or not. And if it's not doing that, then you kind of have nothing. So we have made it a very strong principle within the company that all functions, absolutely everybody, is really empowered to push back if they think that we are doing something that is detrimental to the trust in the platform. And this literally means they can say, no, I don't think we should do this. And any PM in my org, I expect to fully stop work when that happens to resolve that issue. I mentioned the apply table centralization issue before. Over the course of that project, we had a lot of decisions to make about how did we attribute an application to a previous click. There are some cases where we've got some messy pixel data, some cases where multiple clicks maybe could have done it. We need to make a decision. I kind of thought that we had hammered all of them out, and then an engineer started noticing something weird. He didn't think that he was quite being heard, and he just raised a red flag. He was like, no, I don't want to talk about anything else in this meeting until we resolve this. And because we had that culture of this really needs to be trusted, that was very okay to do. So he wrote a manifesto. Not quite. It was like a 3-page Google Doc of all the things that he thought were wrong and potential mitigation strategies. It was fantastic. It was detailed. I told him great, run with this. Nicely delegated. Yeah, track this down. You care about this. Let's do it. But in some some places you would run into a circumstance where it's like, yeah, but we really need to get this out the door. And that absolutely cannot be your mode of operating in a data world. So we nurtured this, we encouraged it, we gave good feedback. He got promoted the next cycle. And I know that in another culture, it would be a situation where that would have been something that was very detrimental to his career. So I've got a couple cases of that. Again, we have like data spaghetti. So that kind of conversation actually comes up a lot. Very rare to the like very red flag, but we talk about trust very often. And the thing that I am telling all of the engineers on my projects is tell me that you are proud of this product and that you are sure that to the best of your ability, this is doing what it's expected. So we really emphasize product quality. Again, that doesn't mean that absolutely everywhere you are completely 100% rigorous. It means that you are very clear, though, when you are operating in a hacky mode versus this is a trusted data set that you can use for very general purposes. So that's where we've gotten, the tools that we've used so far. I'm sure that we're going to learn more along our journey. But at least what I can tell you now is that we've actually moved the needle on this. So 2019 wasn't there at the time. I'm told it was a really wild situation, and I see a lot of slide decks that seem to back that up. And over just the last year and a half that I've been able to observe, there's been really marked progress in terms of how well we can quantify this, how easy it is to answer basic questions, and the velocity, too, that we can collaborate with machine learning and actually build on top of this. So all that to say, we're not at the promised land yet. If I'm back here next year, happy to give you an update on what's going on here. But basically, for any of you that are also struggling with 10 plus years old infrastructure, there is hope. It's a lot of people work. It's a very steady excellence over time and consistency type of problem, but progress can be made. So that's my spiel. Happy to take any questions you have.